Hello, Legal Helm listeners. Today, I am delighted to be speaking with Robert Ingalls, CEO and founder of LawPods, one of the first podcast production agencies for law firms. Robert is also a recovering attorney, a professional speaker, and at LawPods, Robert and his team help some of the premier law firms in the world launch and grow branded podcasts that build relationships and drive revenue. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking to Robert about how to turn your firm podcast into a content marketing machine. Robert, hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. It's so good to be here. Appreciate it.
So you describe yourself, and I love this, you describe yourself as a recovering attorney. Please tell our audience a little bit about your journey that led you to LawPods.
Sure. Well, first, full disclosure, I stole that. I have no idea where I stole it from, but I saw somebody else. There's quite a few of us out there that have done the law track and then said, I'm going to chase my dreams. And so it's certainly something I stole. But the short story is I went to law school for perhaps the wrong reasons. Law was always something I was interested in. And coming from a low income community, it was also very prestigious. Like lawyers, just wow, doctors, lawyers, such, right? And so that was kind of part of it. And also, once I was done with college, I was like, what am I going to do now? Like, I didn't really have any understanding of what was next, and I'd gotten pretty good at school at that point. So hey, let's do some more school. Let's do law school. And I went to school. I became a criminal defense attorney. Really didn't like almost any part of the process. Didn't really like school. Ugh. And well, I don't know, you get to law school and just everybody's smart. No matter where you go, like everybody's pretty brilliant. And I wasn't used to that. And then I got into practicing law, and criminal law especially was hard on me. It was I my emotions are always right here at the surface. There's no turning it off. They would say, "Oh, you have to compartmentalize. You have to leave it at work." It's not a skill I developed then. It's not one I have now, nor do I really want now. And so it got really hard doing the kind of things I was doing. I kind of felt on a daily basis like I was the villain in somebody's movie that day. And oh, I don't like that. I kind of like it on a day-to-day basis where everybody I see kind of just enjoys my presence. And that was tough on me. And just the law in general was not good for my mental health. I had a lot of anxiety. And then after I'd been married a very short period of time, my wife kind of sprang on me, "Hey, I would think we should start having a baby right this second." And I mean, she was right. We were not as young as we thought we were. But at that moment, it had been future guy's problem. And now all of a sudden it was like today guy's problem. And that kind of broke me. But that moment also sent me on this path of self-discovery. Like I need to figure something out because what's happening right now is not going to work with a family. It was barely working when it was kind of just us as a couple. And yeah, that sent me on the path. And I started just looking for knowledge of like, hey, how do I make money? I had a law firm, but I didn't know how to make any money. And it started with reading books, and then books led to podcasts. And within a month of listening to my first podcast, I bought this mic that I'm talking into. I was just taken by the medium. And over a period of years, my hobby started to get noticed by other people, and they asked me for help. And I mean, it was 2015 when I listened to that podcast, and what are we in 24 now? So in under 9 years, I'm sitting here doing a completely different thing for some of the biggest companies in the world, and it blows my mind. So that's the short story, if that tells you anything about me.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I love the fact that you're absolutely right. There's so many ex-lawyers that I speak to that have gone off on their own little journeys and ended up, either being CEO of marketing companies that still in the legal space, helping law firms in some shape or fashion, but also some of them going off in the technology space, right, and actually building products that then can serve the legal market. So not necessarily like taking a full step away, but still having your finger in the pie, but maybe a less stressful version, which I can totally appreciate, having been immersed from a technology perspective in a law firm and dealing with some of the dynamics and some of the just some of the pressure and some of the just the aspects of a law firm that I can't compare it to anything else. It's a very different, it's a different dynamic to deal with. So you being a lawyer in that mode, I can totally understand why you've ended up going this path. And I'm very keen to just kind of learn a little bit more in terms of why podcasts, right? So you obviously like focusing on the marketing side of things of a law firm. Is there something that drew you to podcasts specifically versus, the overall marketing strategy of a law firm?
So the first podcast I really listened to was with the founder of Quest Nutrition, name's Tom Bilyeu. He's since sold his stake in it, and he has a podcast and production called Impact Theory now. And he said something on that podcast. I could boil it down to its most basic form of you can do anything you want with your life. And we've heard that so many times it's trite, but I heard it and I believed it in that moment. I was in this place in my life where that message, I was ready for it and I heard it. And for me, it was one of those clear moments in life where there was before and there was after. It was like the blinders came off and I saw all this possibility and I took off running. Every book that I could get my hands on about mindset and self improvement, and I just wanted it all so bad. And I realized that all of that came from a conversation that two people sat down and had at some point in the past. And they put it on the internet and hoped it would have value. And your listeners may have recognized this by now, but I like to hear myself talk. I have things I think that need to be said. And I did. I said, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of these conversations. And I bought this mic, which I feel like says something about me as well. Go big or go home. And because I could not afford this mic at the time. And I'm in my spare bedroom. I'm learning how to do all this stuff. And I end up starting a podcast in my law firm. And I immediately start to see the value. People are listening to it. People are talking to me about it. And I'm seeing that when I talk to people, they already have a sense for who I am because they've listened to me. They've gotten a little of my sense of humor and they've started to trust me a little bit because they have heard me talk and okay, this guy already knows what he's talking about. And I found that really powerful. I'd like to tell you that I immediately saw the path. I did not. At the time, I had no belief that this is where I would end up because I hadn't opened my mind that far yet, where I believed like somebody who did criminal justice, some poli-sci, went to law school, no business, no communications, no marketing. Like this wasn't an area I belonged in to me at that time, but I did understand the power of it. And then over a period of years, people were asking me to do it. And I saw that as a unique opportunity for lawyers because I'd seen the success I'd had with it, but I was also seeing the success in the market of B to C, B to B podcast. And other major players were starting to invest in the space, but I was also keeping up with I think Edison Research does every year, they do state of the industry, they do podcasting, radio, every kind of media. And I was keeping up with that. And I was watching the way consumption was growing and the demographics of consumption as well. Who was listening, the ages that were listening. And one of the things I noticed was people that were making more money were listening at a higher rate. And that was interesting to me. And then we were seeing consumer behavior change to where people were starting to understand that they could get information from a podcast. They could learn something. And I was very early at the time. And I still think I still believe it's a little early, but people are now, I mean, we see it. People understand that podcasts are a place to get that. And I believed at the moment that this is where it was going to go. Could have been wrong. It worked out, but I really did see that in the marketplace. And there was so much white space. No one was really doing it. And the people that were doing it, there's a lot of them weren't doing it well. And I wanted to be a part of it. I knew I wanted to do something different. I'd already at this point decided to leave law behind, but I wasn't positive what it was going to be. And I think what really allowed me to take that step was a lawyer in my community came up to me at a networking event and he said, I see that you're doing this podcast stuff. Do you think you could help me do that? And I said, I'd love to help you. And he said, okay, come by tomorrow. And that was my first chance. That was the first person who gave me money to do the thing for them. I learned a lot from it. I really enjoyed it. I saw that he saw value in it. And it just little by little over years kept growing until I was able to, on March 2nd, 2020, quit my full-time job that I'd taken to build the company and go all in.
Fantastic. What a great story. I'm interested to know a little bit more about like what you see as the typical audience for a law firm, because when I think about podcasts, like as you kind of alluded to earlier, I do think about self-help, some fiction stuff, some comedy stuff, right? But it wouldn't occur to me to go and listen to a podcast from a law firm, right? So help us understand, like what's the typical audience, and what kind of content works for a law firm that is engaging.
I think that always starts with why. Why are we doing it? What do we hope to get from it? Because one of the questions that lawyers will inevitably ask me is, I've heard that I should do a podcast, but who would listen to a lawyer's podcast? And I tell them no one until the bad thing happens, until their wife gets hit by a car, until they are dealing with a will contest because one of their parents died without a will and now there's a fight. They have a problem. They don't know the answer to that problem. They go to the lawyer's website. That's why we've been blogging for so long. That's why we've been creating content of all kinds to answer questions. And that's one of the biggest ways that my clients, and I see other lawyers doing it, is they're using it as almost an FAQ model. We know what you want to know. Here's the answer. You're also getting to know me a little bit while I'm giving you that answer. Getting to understand who I am. Oh, I like the cut of his jib. And feeling you out and saying, this is somebody I'd like to at least call. And then you sit down with them. They talk to you. They already feel like they have a sense for you. They're farther down the road. That we have effectively nurtured that lead with this podcast. And that's one of the biggest ways that my clients do it. And then another is providing education and or entertainment for your referral sources. We have a podcast called Trial Lawyer Nation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's about trial lawyer things, how to run a trial practice, but also how to try cases, different unique things, talking to accomplished trial lawyers about the cases that they have tried and the unique tactics and how this happened and how did jury selection work. And other trial lawyers are listening to that. They're getting to know the host and see the host as somebody who they can trust and authority. And now when they have cases that come up, maybe the case is a little too big for them, they want to refer it out, they want to co-counsel it, who are they going to send that to? And that is an excellent tool also for networking. You've got this big listenership and you are bringing on all these other lawyers and you're getting to meet them in real time. Me and you are doing it right now. We are networking in real time. We've never met before. We talk for a couple minutes off the mic and then here we are. We're getting to know each other during this conversation. And there's so much value in that, in getting to know somebody, adding them to your network across the world that you likely would have never met before because of this platform that you have. And then another angle is thought leadership. Lawyers love thought leadership, but this is where we see a lot of my big firm clients are effectively using this. They are the first person talking about the thing, whether that thing is, transfer pricing or AI. There's a lot of, regulatory things, issues between the EU and the UK. There's so many different things that are developing all the time. And these law firms are taking the opportunity to be the first voice out there talking about this. And they're gaining a following, being the first people talking about these things. And so there's so many different ways lawyers can capitalize on the medium. It's not just one way. And one way I didn't talk about that can be done well, but is a little harder, I think, than the other models, is you can do something community-based, where it's a show in your community about your community. You're getting to know people in the community, and people will listen, get to know you, and then you're also a lawyer. you talk about that a little bit. Maybe your law firm sponsors the podcast. They're hearing you over and over. Kind of the big shotgun branding approach of people are going to get to know me. By that, they're going to start to trust me. And when they do need me, that's who they're going to think about, right? That one's a longer play. It's not the same as, hey, I'm answering your question that you have, because somebody who has a question who's listening to a podcast, that's somebody who could be your client tomorrow. So that's, from an ROI perspective, that's the kind of podcast that can drive leads a little bit faster. But those are just a few of the different methods that I have clients that are doing.
Brilliant. I love the kind of correlation between blog content in particular, because you're right. Like, there's so much content that we produce, whether it be a law firm or any company for that matter. And I think to our website as examples where blog content is constantly being put out there. But actually, how easy is that to consume, right? When we're being battered with information from everywhere. And actually just being able to take some time out on your walk with your Apple AirPods in and listening to a lawyer explain things so that you've got that kind of FAQ and awareness makes total sense. Like, it really does. So podcasts are part of a law firm's strategy in kind of the world that you're living in. And if you were to rank podcasts in an overall marketing strategy, like, how high up in the list does it come? And how do you mentioned ROI, and I'm keen to learn a little bit more about that. How do you measure ROI when you're part of like a bigger marketing strategy, which could have website content and other stuff that you're doing? How do you determine what's working?
Sure. I will preface this with, I like to stay in my lane when it comes to overall marketing strategy, because, I said at the outset, this area was new to me just 8 years ago. However, since that time, I've been face first in it. I love it. I'm a lot of my network and the people that I work around every day are deep in it. And for me, podcasting can effectively be the cornerstone of a firm's content marketing machine if they choose. As far as where it slots in, I think that that's going to be an individual decision that a firm's going to need to make based on what their strategy already is as it exists. If I'm a small firm, I'm just starting out, I have to think about where every dollar goes. If I waste $10,000 one year, that's crippling. Whereas for a firm of some size, they're not really going to notice that. Now, they're going to hope they don't lose it again, but it's not going to hurt them in any appreciable way. And a lot of firms that are starting out want to do a podcast. And the ones that are doing it when they're small end up usually doing a lot of it in-house.
Hey, John, how do I find out what we've invoiced my client?
How can I view my outstanding WIP?
How do I submit my expenses again?
Do we have next Monday off?
Monday off?
It's exciting to have fresh faces at your law firm, but onboarding them takes a lot of time and a lot of energy when everyone is remote. You're busy enough as it is. Helm 360 has the solution. Just ask Termi, Helm 360's next-level chatbot solution for knowledge management. Termi can answer many of your new hires' questions for you without distracting you or anyone else at the firm. This means fewer frantic emails, fewer help desk tickets, more time and more focused productivity for everyone at the firm. Working with Termi, you can have those eager new employees up to speed in a snap. They may never need to ask you a question again. Check out helm360.com/Termi to see Termi in action and find out how it can make onboarding new hires as easy as sending an email.
And I think that can be tough. If they're okay just sitting down, hitting record and getting it out without doing a ton of editing, a ton of sound design, things like that. Because it seems when you listen to a podcast, it sounds like, oh, that's not going to be that hard, right? I think you probably know the ins and outs of that well. It can be a little more difficult to pull something like that off. And then you start looking to hire people and it can start to add up a little bit. But once a firm passes that threshold where they can afford to spend, a couple $1,000s a month putting a good product together, then it can really start to drive results. So one of the things that I find to be most powerful about the podcast is you sit down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you have a conversation. And then if you have a team working on that, the lawyer stands up, they walk away. That's it. That's the extent of the lawyer's involvement in the podcast frequently. And now it gets edited and it becomes a podcast. It goes on Spotify and Apple and all the places and on the website. We're also capturing, you and I are on Riverside right now. We're capturing the high quality video of this interaction. That's going to get edited and put on YouTube, where we are seeing, for a lot of clients, we're seeing a solid 25% bump in listenership just by putting the video on YouTube. And that's incredible. That's higher than I thought it was going to be. So now we've got that content there. And we are also taking this and we're finding those nuggets in there and we're clipping them. And we're putting them in vertical format, landscape, square on social media. We have little quotes that we have that we're pulling out that have solid impact and putting an image on those and sharing those on social media as well. If we bring a guest on, we take that stuff and we send it to the guest as well so they can share it, because the stuff makes them look really good. And who doesn't like looking really good? Especially when they don't have to do any of the work. They can just grab the stuff and share it. And then it goes on the website with the player, with the video embedded coming back on there, with the show notes. You can also transcribe it and add that there as well. And so you have this plethora of content by having a lawyer sit down for 20, 30, maybe an hour.
With regard to podcasts in general, when I look at, like, when I scroll my podcast app, there are hundreds, thousands of different podcasts to select. What would you say are the key ingredients to stand out in the crowd? Like, how do you get them there in the first place to listen to a podcast? And what are the key ingredients that need to be in the podcast or the production to make it, something that you're going to go back to, right? Like really that part of it, because I guess content makes up a lot of it in terms of like who's presenting and the topic that's being presented. But there's a draw to kind of get you in there, and I think you kind of touched on this with the YouTube publishing and all that fun stuff. But are there any other tips that you can share with the audience that could be valuable to make that happen?
So you said, where are people going to find it? It has been, a lot of people are finding it on the website, because they're, especially if it's the kind of podcast that is nurturing leads. If it's that first kind we talked about where we're nurturing leads, people have a problem. They may have found you through SEO, PPC, a referral. They landed on your website and they have a question. There are episodes there that are answering their questions when they're browsing around, and they found you there. So a lot of times people will find it on the website for that way. Your social channels as well. If you're filling up your social channels with these clips that have titles that speak directly to the pain points of the prospect, they're going to find it there. They're going to see that. And that clip is going to say, listen to the episode to hear more. So now you're converting that person into a listener by getting them in through the website, getting them in through your social channels. And if it's the trial or nation style where we are educating our referral sources, there's a lot of word of mouth there. Now we want to have it on the website. We want to make sure that we're filling up social channels, that we're sending this content to our guests so they can share it and show people and recruit listeners that way. But we also want to make sure that we are building that listenership by encouraging other people to share it. And one of the best ways that we encourage people to share it is by just consistently making good content, valuable content. Because all of us, if we're listening here, we're clearly a podcast listener. All of us are podcast listeners. And when we have a podcast that we like, I have a handful that I know when I press play, it's not going to disappoint me. And I come back for every episode, because every episode is for me. But we also have a lot of podcasts that we like, but we kind of forget about. We listen to an episode and we're like, oh, that was so good. And then we listen to a couple more and we're like, lukewarm. And even though we love a couple episodes, we don't make them a habit, because it's hit or miss. And then we might come back, but we also might forget, because every day there's something new. And by consistently creating content that's valuable for your niche, for that niche of listeners that you have created, it's one of the best ways to grow your audience with that style of podcast. The first style, you're not really looking for subscribers, because once they hire you, for the most part, you might make stuff about walking them through the case, or, what to expect at mediation, stuff like that. But in general, they're one and dones. They're coming in, they're getting in, they hire you, that's it. But when you're looking for the subscribers, it really is important to make sure it's easy to find, sound quality is good, which will come in, I'll answer kind of the second part of your question is, how are we making content that's good? One of the easiest things you can do to make good content is buy a USB microphone. Buy a microphone that plugs right into your computer. Now, feel free to go big if you want, but if you have more money than you have time, and when I say money, it's like $50-$60 to buy a really good USB microphone. Plugs right in the side of your computer, and it's going to sound virtually indistinguishable to the untrained ear from how I sound right now with a much more expensive setup. And that is going to make all the difference in your podcast quality. You're going to have something that sounds good. It's not going to pick up a ton of background noise. There's a couple that I recommend just to give some value right here is the ATR 2100X, pretty solid microphone at the price. You can usually find it around $50 or $60. Samson Q2U. The biggest things I tell people is you want a dynamic cardioid microphone. Don't worry about what those things mean. Dynamic cardioid microphone. And that is going to be good for your spare bedroom, your conference room, wherever you happen to need to record. That's going to be a good mic. A lot of people like to buy the Blue Yeti. I know it's very sexy. I get it. It's like super big and you feel like Walter Cronkite. But the problem you run into with a mic like that is it's a great mic for a sound conditioned environment. But when you put it into a conference room with the HVAC running, it's going to sound like, and that's not great. And so that's an easy way is to get that microphone, make sure it sounds halfway decent. Use we're on Riverside right now. This is a relatively cheap service to use, and it records both participants on separate tracks and does the audio in high quality. So the way I sound right now is not going to get distorted by a weak internet connection. So if you bring a guest in, they have an internet connection that kind of wobbles. Generally, that's not going to get affected here because it's recording locally, then uploading. Same with the video. So if you're on Zoom, you'll see those differences. You'll see the audio go in and out a little, the video will jump, it'll get grainy. Little things like that can be really easy to do and cheap, and they will bring up the production value of the podcast. And when that production value comes up, it says something. When somebody hears that and they hear an intro with a voiceover and some sound design to it, which isn't that hard, isn't that expensive if you're working with almost any agency. And those little things tell people these people are serious. Like this is legit content. And it's so much easier and more inexpensive, I think a lot of lawyers find, than a lot of other content that they're used to making. So those just a few ways that lawyers can make content that's going to resonate with people and make it good.
Brilliant. There's a lot of tips in there, really useful ones. So I appreciate that. I'm sure the audience will benefit from that wisdom. So just final question here, and then we'll just kind of go through some wrap up stuff. I'm just interested to get your take on what you see as future for podcasting in the legal space in particular. Any trends that you're seeing? Obviously there's so much happening in the technology side of the world with regard to AI, etc., that can, enhance, improve, or allegedly improve some of the stuff that we do day in, day out. Is any of that impacting the way that you work or the way that you advise law firms in terms of how to do production?
Yeah, it definitely is. And we are leveraging tools because why would we not? I'm one of those people that every time there's a tech revolution, there's the people who complain about it and say, oh, it ate my lunch. And then there's the people who figured out how to use it and they made a fortune. And I'm not going to be one of those agencies who has their lunch eaten, but we use it a lot. One of the most valuable ways I've seen to use it is with transcripts. And you can get perfect's the wrong word. You can get a very serviceable transcript and then use that to ask questions, to find out main ideas and keyword searches and finding things and organizing things. So you can get really far down the road in organizing the content that you want to take and turn into written content and turn into video clips and even title ideas for different things. There's so many different things you can do with whatever AI tool that you're using. And every day GPT is getting better, and all of the services are getting better to where you can start to have your own custom, you can build your own custom GPTs where you can just add all of the things that you want to add, and it knows what to do with that. It knows how to go here, 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 and take off like a spider web. And that is incredible. It saves a lot of time learning how to use those tools. There's a lot that you can use as well for audio and video. I don't think most of those are there yet. I'm also not one of those people who's like, it'll never be better than a human. I think it'll be much better than a human at some point, but we're not there yet. But there, Adobe Podcast is pretty good. Like if you just need a podcast to get out there and you're not getting too hung up on perfection, which I think is fine, then yeah, tools like that are great. Descript is really cool. I will caution people, you can end up spending a lot of time. They sound easy, but you can spend a lot of time in those tools. And if you're starting out and you do have way more time than money, I get that. I've been there. Like I said, I created a podcast at my law firm and it was all me. Then it may be worth doing it that way. But some of those tools, they can be really great. On the audio and video side, we don't really leverage most of those yet. Because as a professional agency, we are into every moment and making sure that cuts are smooth and that we understand context. Because a lot of these, like Descript is an example, they'll take out every I don't want to take out every I want to take out the ones that shouldn't be there, the ones that don't add value, the ones that are distracting. But if you ask me a question, and it might be a bit personal, and I might take a breath like that. Usually we'll reduce a breath. Like moment to moment, we're going to reduce that stuff so you're not hearing it being distracted by it. But if I take a second and that's staying. But AI doesn't know that that's staying. It doesn't realize the impact of that yet. And the same with filler words. I might go, that means something. And so those are the areas where we are very thoughtful about creating content that reflects exactly what people were trying to say, that isn't losing context and also doesn't have hard cuts. When our editing philosophy is make someone sound like they're having their best public speaking day while leaving zero trace that we were there. And so if we can't make a cut on something that doesn't tell the listener, they might not even know what happened. They'll go, that didn't feel right. Your ear heard something. Don't make the cut. And right now that requires a person to review and go in and make those cuts and understand them. But AI tools are coming a long way, especially on the written content side. It really helps. I would never run our content through GPT and then just spit it out to a client. Of course not. There's always, our team is, you start there. And let it do a lot of the piecing together for you that might take you an hour or two. And then you take it and use it. That is how we're using a lot of it right now. And it's one of those areas you probably know better than me. It is growing so fast every day. Like one process that we use is obsolete next week, and we have to figure out the new process, which is really exciting for somebody like me though. Like I'm down in the rabbit hole on it.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that you were embracing it as well. And I say this a lot to people, and it's kind of like what Iron Man's suit does for him, right? It's basically the same thing. You've got an opportunity to put that suit on and do some amazing things. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you give it a bash, right? So it's definitely worth it. And I was smiling when you were talking about the ums and ahs, because I actually had some feedback early on when we were doing our podcast production. And somebody actually said to me, they gave me some feedback on one of the episodes that we put out there where we just did not do any edits. We just decided just to see what happens if we don't do any edits. And we got some feedback saying that was the most naturally sounding one that we've ever heard. Do more of those, right? Like we don't want to hear the perfect version of a podcast. We want to hear people being normal, having chats, and how what you can relate to at the end of the day, because people make mistakes and that's normal, right? So they didn't want it. They didn't want it to be overly polished. So yeah, there's definitely a balance. There's a balance to that for sure. Thank you for that.
People are used to hearing that in their everyday life. They're used to hearing that kind of conversation, and
exactly.
it gets. We've all had those people that we listen to where you're like, that's too much. It's so distracting, and that's where I encourage people to clean that up a little bit. but don't be heavy-handed.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Thank you, Robert. That was very insightful, very helpful for the audience. I just have a couple of wrap-up questions.
Oh, please.
The first one being, if you could borrow Doctor Who's time machine and go back to yourself when you were 18 years old, what advice would you give yourself?
First, which Doctor Who?
In
the modern era. Who is it?
I'll leave that to you because that's a controversial.
It's Matt Smith. It's always Matt Smith.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I love this question so much. The fact that I can tell you who the 11th Doctor is tells you a little bit about my relationship to the show. So I love it. First, I would say I would never do anything to impact that because wife, my daughter, all of that. But I think the thing I would do to myself, is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Learn the growth mindset immediately and everything that around it. I think that would be the piece of advice. That's been the most impactful thing for me, is learning how to change the way I see the world and telling that human who had so much potential but was so just closed in the way that he saw the world. I think just saying, find out what the growth mindset is and learn everything you can about it. I think that would be incredible. Hopefully, I don't know, 18-year-old me was a jackass, so I don't know if he'd listen. But screw you, old man.
When we all.
Yeah.
Excellent. And you when you were talking about some of your early career and some of the kind of mental health challenges that you were dealing with, if there's someone in the audience that's experiencing the same thing, what would your advice be to them? Like, what's the one thing that they could do today to kind of change the dynamic the way that you have to get to where you are today and get out of that kind of hole that you were in?
I think I think like society's come a long way with this, but just be okay with having a mental health problem. It's that I grew up in a time when it just wasn't. I mean, it was starting to get talked about, but it wasn't something that you had. Like, that was ultimately the subtext was that's weakness. And I think that's still a little more pervasive than it should be, but just making the space in your own mind to say, yeah, I struggle. And to me, at this point in my life, I treat mental health the same way I treat physical health. It's not something that I'm just guaranteed. It's something I have to focus on. I am mindful every day. And I talk to my therapist at least once a month, every month, no matter how good my life is going. Because I don't look at it as fixing something. I look at it as doing routine maintenance, as making sure that I am staying on top of things, that I'm not letting my own BS rule me as well, because we can get into these ideas about reality that just aren't true. And sometimes you need somebody to hear you and ask you a very pointed question and allow you to go, oh yeah, thank you. Like, and so just paying attention to your mental health, being okay, making it a priority and getting help. I would be devastated if my therapist like retired because I gotta find a new person because it's such an important part of my life, and I don't know what. Like, it would be crazy to me. It would be like not exercising. Like, I can't live my life like that. And so I think for me, that's a big part of it. Be okay having it. Be okay talking to somebody, and really addressing it, being thoughtful about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, both in professional capacity, sharing your expertise, but also being a bit vulnerable and actually telling us, something personal, which I think a lot of us can relate to. So I really do appreciate that. Robert, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the kinds of questions you've asked. I've been able to talk about some things that I haven't really addressed before. So thanks for making that space.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Legal Helm. Thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us out.